Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, April 11th, 2021. I'll be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news and information this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. We've got another great show, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off with a look at healthcare. Joining us on the line, she is the healthcare editor for Business Insider. We're talking about Lydia Ramsey Flanzer. Lydia, great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Absolutely, anytime.
And I should also add that I always forget this, that you are also the editor of Dispense, which is a consolidation of all the news in the week, which you can find on the Business Insider website that consolidates all the healthcare news. Okay, Lydia, there's a lot going on, vaccines, startups. What's top of mind this week for you and the team over at BI?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess to start, I was going to ask you, have you gotten your vaccine yet?
I have. Well, the answer to that is no. I have not gotten my vaccine yet. I have looked online, but have not been able to book my appointment. But I do know that. So where I live in Charlotte, this is a long-winded answer, Lydia. I know you were expecting yes and no, but where I live in Charlotte, my wife and I live in Charlotte. Across the way is kind of the convention center where they are doing that for many, many, many Americans here in the area. So we're waiting with bated breath.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just got my first dose this week, so
And how did that go?
hopefully you're able to get one soon. But yeah, so oh, sorry. I think I might be cutting out a little.
No, that's fine. I think I interrupted you, but I was going to say, tell us about your vaccine experience. You know, you've covered the vaccines since, we've been talking about this since the pandemic began. What was your experience like?
Yeah, it was good. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast a few times, but I hadn't expected to get a shot until the summer. So when I saw that Colorado was opening up eligibility starting, I think it was April 2nd, I was really excited to get an appointment. So I got one for last Tuesday. I got my first shot of 2, so I'm excited to go back. A little nervous about what the side effects will be, but it's exciting to see how quickly eligibility is expanding. I think the Biden administration said that everyone should be eligible by April 19th, but yeah, to your point, it's always a toss-up between whether or not you can actually get one. I know we trolled a lot of websites, my husband and I, for a couple of days, but it's really exciting. It's cool. I got one of the mRNA vaccines. That was pretty cool to try out this new technology. In a sense, it's the first time I've had a shot that's made with this tech. I'm pretty sure that's the case for pretty much everyone in the world getting one of these shots. So that's cool as a biotech reporter. And just from a public health perspective, it's cool to think that I can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and think, okay, hopefully my chances of getting and maybe one day we'll learn about transmission, spreading the virus is much lower than it once was.
And Lydia, just to ask you kind of a personal question, but did you have any side effects? I know my one of my parents had the vaccine and it felt a little bad the next couple of days. How about yourself? Did you experience anything?
Yeah, just on the first dose, not too much. I have a pretty sore arm. Unloading the dishwasher was a little bit trickier than it usually is. But I am bracing myself for my second dose. That won't be coming for a couple more weeks, but I've heard lots of stories about how much that can knock you out. So I'm hopeful I'm in the minority that doesn't get knocked out, but I'm preparing for the worst. Stocking up on some Gatorade and things like that.
and I know I was talking to my brother this week. He also got it in Massachusetts. What was the process like for you? I mean, did you have to wait in a long line? You said you trolled some websites to get an appointment, but once you got that appointment, you just walk in. What can people expect? Obviously it's going to vary site to site, but what can people generally expect?
Yeah, definitely. So when we got our shots, I was scheduled for an appointment. My husband tagged along, and he ultimately got a shot too. So we went to a grocery store, King Soopers, one of the Kroger brands, and that process was really smooth. the appointment was at 7 p.m. and we were pretty much the only one in the store and in line for the pharmacy. We were really the only ones getting the vaccine at that time, which
Hmm.
was a little disconcerting. I was like, okay, where
Where's
we need to be
everybody
rolling this
else?
out so quickly. Where is
Yeah.
everyone? Yeah, but it was really nice because that meant, I didn't have to wait. Really what took up the most time was, waiting after just to make sure we didn't have allergic reactions, which is a great time to take selfies and take pictures of your card so you don't lose it. So it was pretty painless as an experience goes. I'm sure, to your point, it varies quite a lot if you're doing a drive up or doing another kind of procedure, but having an appointment was great. And yeah, it was really smooth. It was, honestly, it felt less intense on my arm than a flu shot. So that's
And
good
and
news.
and they give you, yeah, and that's good. I've had tetanus shot. I've never had the flu shot before, but I've had a tetanus shot, and I recall, I think you get that every 5 to 7 years, and I recall having my arm very sore. But can you just talk about the card a little bit? Is it a piece of paper? Is it plastic? Is it digital? How does that how did that work?
Yeah. So when CDC kind of brought up this idea, it's obviously not a new idea. We've seen this used for other vaccinations. I think yellow fever, when you're traveling, you want to have certain vaccinations, and they can come on these kind of CDC vaccination cards. So it's no different than that. It's about the size of an index card. It fits into my wallet, but didn't fit into my husband's wallet. So it's a little bit bigger than, I guess, a bill or a credit card. But yeah, it seemed pretty sturdy. And it's really nice to have. Nothing about it is electronic, which is interesting. Obviously, the pharmacy recorded details about the shot I was getting, but the card I received didn't have, like, say, a QR code or some kind of online tracking, which is an interesting question people were raising, and I think they still are with the whole vaccine passport conversation. But yeah, for now it's pretty low tech.
Yeah, well, at least you got it. So you now, you and your husband, I guess, need to have one more dose. But once you get that dose, are you thinking about? And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make this all about you, but I think your experience is, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think your experience is, it's always good to understand what the experience is like. But are
Yeah,
you more
definitely.
are you more apt to visit family? How are you thinking about traveling? Things like that.
Yeah, it's a kind of a constantly evolving kind of conversation and in my brain of just like, who am I seeing? Are they also vaccinated? What kind of risk am I assuming? What are they assuming? As I get closer to 2 weeks after the second dose, that risk will be much lower for me personally, right? We're seeing like this has really protective evidence, right, especially against like pretty severe disease for people who are vaccinated. But I always want to be cognizant of the people I'm also coming into contact with. I think, you know, one of our reporters this week posed this question to Dr. Fauci, and he had a really interesting perspective on it. There's certain risks he was willing to take, for instance, gathering with neighbors and friends in his house unmasked. That was something he was comfortable with. But outdoor dining was something less comfortable with. I think I personally would feel comfortable getting on a plane with a mask. But I agree. I don't know if I'm really ready to eat indoors. But maybe someday. At least the weather is shaping up for spring and summer. So
Yeah,
more outdoor dining is
yeah,
on the
definitely.
horizon.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And you look at like states. I was reading something this morning about Texas, and Texas, I think, eliminated the mask mandate, but people are still wearing masks. And I think I would wear a mask for a while until I knew that it was less risky to me and those around me not to wear a mask. I don't know. I feel like it's in fashion now.
Yeah, it feels weird to see people without masks.
It
That's for
does,
sure.
but it is a little unnerving, I have to say, that you can't see below their eyes. So, I'm so used to seeing if they're smiling or if they're frowning or doing something else with to read their facial expressions. A little bit more challenging about that. Liddy, while we have you here, just one more question in terms of, are there any more developments in terms of the vaccine? Do we know anything more about how long it lasts? For example, you mentioned the prevention of transmission. Any more things coming, information coming that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think that is coming. I might be misremembering it. I know for sure that Pfizer's data on this is out. This kind of unfolded in the past couple weeks. That we're seeing 6 months protection. So that's great news on the longevity front of how these are working. The CDC kind of, I think, overstepped what it meant to say and was starting to suggest that transmission is cut by the vaccines. But I'll be waiting on more data around that. I think everyone's hoping that vaccines help stop transmission. But I think we're going to need to see what that looks like, especially as we see kind of case counts still spike. Michigan in particular is having a really rough go of it right now. So we're still not out of the woods yet, as much optimism as there is.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. I think optimism, but also recalibrating your expectations to make sure that we understand that we're not going to get back to normal just because you have a vaccine. There's a lot of things that have to happen, but it's a step in the right direction. Lydia, it is always a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for dealing with my questioning of you directly. It wasn't meant to
Yeah,
be
happy to
personal,
help.
but I appreciate you sharing your perspective. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Bye bye. Welcome back. Now, time to take a look at what's happening in technology. And joining us on the line, he's the executive producer and lead advisor for Seven Investing. Let's welcome back to the program, Daniel Klein. Dan, so great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Ah, so happy to be here, Jeff.
Yeah, and I understand it's getting really warm in Florida.
We're going to the beach tomorrow, so we're gonna we're gonna take some lemons, go buy some sugar, make lemonade.
There you go. And is the water warmer in down there at this time of year?
So the water here, if you're from the Northeast, is absolutely delightful. I unfortunately have spent so much time in the Bahamas that I've gotten back to the point where if it's not warm here, I might think the beach is cold. But generally, we have, waters in the 70s pretty much all year, which would be like July in Swampscott, Massachusetts, where I grew up.
Well, I hope you have a good time and enjoy the weather. Get some downtime. Put down the podcasts. Put down the computer and just chill out. All right, Dan. Let's jump in because we've got some really interesting topics. I know Best Buy is kind of getting into. I don't know if is it a rival to Amazon Prime, but it's going to offer tech support and free installs. And I know this was really interesting to you and us.
Yeah, so Best Buy has a new $200 a year sort of Amazon Prime like offering. You get access to technical help, you get some level of free installs. They haven't really spelled that out. The only thing that would really be valuable is if those free installs include things like televisions, which are, very expensive to get Best Buy to install. And even if you go online and find like a handyman to do it, it'll still cost you somewhere between $60 and $100. That would really be the only way I would join this. Like, I understand what they're trying to do, but it feels a lot to me like the Walmart Amazon Prime knockoff, which is it's too little too late. Like, we're already Amazon Prime members. We get free shipping. We get access to all the great things you get with Amazon Prime. I'm not sure why anyone would need this, but I respect Best Buy for trying.
Now, Dan, is this a way to bolster the company's financials? I think back in February, they laid off about 5,000 workers and announced plans to close more of their stores. I love Best Buy. Pre-COVID, you walk in there, you can see everything that you want, but you can't afford. I think it's great, and it's one of the last bastions of technology. That CompUSA, Circuit City, Fry's. There are so many others out there that have kind of gone the way of the dodo. Is this just a way to kind of keep things afloat?
So Best Buy is a major retail winner. It's important to remember that. And what they're really doing here is just sort of adjusting their business for the reality of the internet. So like when they're closing stores, it's sort of like every 3 or 4 years, Starbucks announces that it's closing somewhere between 200 and 400 stores. And it does that not because Starbucks isn't doing well, but maybe it had a store near a business tower, and that business tower, the main tenant left, so a huge source of customers. Or maybe it was a store in a mall that's not doing well, and when the lease ends, they decide to leave. That's kind of what Best Buy is doing. They're just adjusting their business for the fact that certain habits have changed, certain items have been ordered online, they don't need as many people. And yeah, this is an attempt to just sort of tie people into their ecosystem. Look, I go to Amazon because I am an Amazon Prime member. I don't think twice about it. Realistically, though, as much as I like Best Buy, and I'm like you, I'll wander around to Best
I
Buy
love it.
anytime. anytime I get the chance. That being said, if right now, if I decide, hey, I need some new headphones, you know where I'm getting them? I am getting them on Amazon
Yeah.
9 times out of 10. So, look, Best Buy should do this. It's not a massive cost to try to do this. I don't expect it's going to work, though.
Yeah, look, I don't know if I'd be signing up for that. I try to, knock on wood, I try to fix my own stuff first before I rely on other people to do it. But hey, look, good for them. Dan, let's switch gears. Let's talk about our friends at T-Mobile, known for their cellular phones, their cellular support, their 5G network. They're launching a consumer home internet service. Pretty interesting.
So I love what they're doing. T-Mobile, which has historically been pretty weak in rural areas, is investing tens of millions of dollars in beefing up that service. So where my family has a home in Peterborough, New Hampshire, right now there's no T-Mobile service. There's also pretty limited internet service. So we have satellite internet, which is terrible. So in theory, if T-Mobile goes into an area like that, lays the infrastructure for even a 4G connection, but certainly a 5G connection, they are then selling home internet at a reasonable price. They're giving you the modem. They're not charging you a rental, which most companies do charge you a rental for their devices.
Hmm.
And they're basically giving you internet that's good enough to watch Netflix. It's good enough for what most people do, and that's going to be a viable alternative in tens of millions of homes that are badly served or in some cases not served by the internet. So, look, do I think this is going to be an option for me living in a city? No, I have T-Mobile. I only have one bar at my house. There is great 5G in parts of West Palm. If they improve that to where I live, it would still not be as good where the technology is now with having a wired internet connection, especially because we're getting fiber, which is going to be 500 megs up, 500 megs down. That being said, as we move into true 5G and in a few years from now 6G, it seems reasonable that your internet provider, that your phone provider could also be an internet provider. And I know I love doing business with T-Mobile. I'd be more than happy to give T-Mobile more of my money instead of giving it to Comcast if that was the choice I came to.
And you bring up the rural areas. We have talked about this on this program and on the network before, Dan. I mean, there's a lot of inequity, and not having access to the internet and at a reasonable rate has put people behind in terms of education, medical, right? Getting health care, getting support. That could be a game changer as well. We need to do more to build out that infrastructure outside of the big cities and urban areas.
Yeah, access to education. There's just so many things that this is relevant. If you live someplace, I'm lucky that my family home is a second home. It's not where any of us live. But using the satellite internet, watching Netflix is glitchy. Like, it's not that fun. If we had the option of not having a satellite in our roof, a satellite that can be impacted by rain or weather, and having a high quality 5G internet connection where I could seamlessly do most things, and it only cost, $40 to $60 extra a month, that to me is a no-brainer. And I think T-Mobile is going to be really successful doing this. And this is going to increase customer loyalty with a company that already has really strong customer loyalty.
Yeah, they do. They do. And I love their commercials as well. Dan Klein, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed time this weekend at the beach with your family. Get some beautiful weather in and get some relaxation. Put down the phones, and maybe you can put the AirPods on if you wanted the earbuds or the headphones. Dan, great talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Looking forward to it, Jeff. Thank you.
Bye. Welcome back. Now, time to talk a little about travel. Yes, travel. That's right. When joining us on the line, he is not only MarketWatch's real estate reporter, he does personal finance, but he also covers travel. I'm talking about Jacob Passy. Jacob, great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, glad to be here as always.
So, Jacob, the weather turning very positive, very, very warm here in the Northeast, and I'm in Charlotte in the southern part of the United States, and people are being vaccinated. That's a good sign. It looks like some rates in parts of the country, COVID rates are going down in some parts of the country. What's the latest on travel?
Yeah, so it's good that you mentioned vaccinations because those are going to become more and more important for travel. So I've been doing a range of different stories in addition to my usual real estate coverage on the situation in the travel industry right now. So, the past few weeks, we've actually seen a massive explosion in the number of Americans traveling. Lots of folks taking Easter trips, Passover trips, trips for spring break. We saw the number of people going through airports cross the 1.5 million mark for the first time since the pandemic began. So, and that was in a single day. So we're talking about millions of people are traveling right now. And the number has stayed above 1 million for quite some time now. So, travel is, coming back with a vengeance. I think a lot of people, delayed their travel plans because of the pandemic, were afraid to travel for valid reasons. And, also lots of people sitting on vouchers that they want or need to use. If you canceled a trip last year, you may have an expiration date on that voucher that you received from your airline or hotel, what have you. But, the challenge that people are going to eventually start to face is certain types of trips are only going to be available to you if you're vaccinated. So I did one story, the cruise industry still has yet to resume operations out of U.S. ports. And that's, some folks may have seen that the state of Florida is actually suing the Biden administration and the CDC over that. But, cruises are beginning to operate in the Caribbean. So they're operating out of ports in the Bahamas and, Barbados, places like that. And in those cases, and also cruises are operating in the Mediterranean and in Southeast Asia. So in those cases, cruise lines are requiring that passengers be vaccinated before getting on their ships. That's not across the board. Some cruise lines have not announced that as a requirement, but more or less almost all the cruises that we've seen resume require that passengers be vaccinated before their trip. And that means fully vaccinated. So, if you're getting the 2-shot vaccines or Pfizer or Moderna, you need both shots, and not just both shots, but you have to wait 2 weeks after, because that's when, that's when scientists say that the vaccine is in full effect. So, or you have to get the Johnson & Johnson and be 2 weeks out from your one dose of that. So that's true for cruises. And then we're also starting to see international locations start to either require or relax their rules around entering their borders for folks who are vaccinated. So Iceland this week started, they loosened their restrictions. So they resumed allowing international tourists to enter their country. And Iceland is obviously quite a popular vacation destination for a lot of Americans. But you have to be vaccinated. You cannot enter Iceland if you are not vaccinated. What other countries are doing is lots of countries have reopened their borders and were originally just requiring that you got tested for COVID in advance. The timing kind of ranged from anywhere from, within the last 5 days to, within 24 hours. You had to have a COVID test, negative COVID test result in hand to be able to board the flight, to be able to enter the country's borders at Border Patrol. Some countries are now relaxing their rules so that if you're vaccinated, you can just show proof of your vaccination instead. And along with all of this, and I'm sure listeners, have been hearing about all the debate about this, but there are going to be vaccine, quote unquote, passports that are rolled out. These aren't going to be like paper passports, most likely. It's going to be probably apps that people use. So the airline industry is developing their own travel pass app that a number of international airlines have signed on to. And so this will be an app that you not only can use to, upload your vaccination proof, you can also upload proof of your COVID test results, because some countries will still require those. And then the good news with a vaccine passport, which I think there's a lot of controversy around those, because they're also used for other purposes here in the States. The good thing about them is, when we are talking about travel and requiring proof, people need to think carefully about keeping their CDC cards safe. We've already seen cases of people losing them, of them getting damaged. I mean, think about going on a cruise ship. You can easily imagine them getting wet from, your towel after the pool. You throw it on your luggage and then don't think about it, and it's soaked through your card. So, the good news about some of these vaccine passports that are being developed is it's a way of uploading your proof without, necessarily needing to bring the physical card with you on your trip. So lots that I just threw at you, but lots going on in travel right now.
Yeah, and Jacob, you've got, as a traveler, you've got to know if you travel intrastate or internationally, you've got to know the rules of that state, right? I mean, you mentioned what's happening with Florida reopening trying to reopen, I should say, the cruise lines out of Florida. That's obviously a big business, and they've been shuttered since the inception of the pandemic, or maybe even a little bit before the pandemic, when the rest of us were all shut down. You've got to really do your research before you try to get on a plane. Right? There's a lot more that goes into trip planning beyond just, hey, we're going to go from this state to this state. We're going to stay at this hotel. There are going to be, 3 kids, 2 adults. We're going to go to Disney World, right? I mean, there is so much that you're going to have to do to prepare yourself, both physically, mentally, for this trip. Jacob? Jacob?
Sorry, I muted myself.
Oh, that's okay.
What
Sorry.
what I was trying to say, but then my phone interrupted me, is that the rules and restrictions keep changing, and so if you book a trip now that you're planning to take later this summer in July or August, it's very likely that the rules will be different by that time. Some travel providers are working to keep folks informed, so like Expedia, the company Expedia, and all their kind of subsidiary booking websites have rolled out a platform where you can check the COVID-related restrictions wherever you're planning to travel. And I think that it's integrated into their bookings so that, if you book through Expedia, I think you'll receive updates on, the COVID restrictions where you're going to. And, internationally, it's a big deal because, you see, in Western Europe, some of the countries are starting to talk about reopening. And some countries in Europe, like Portugal and Greece, are talking about, having special rules that will make it easier for vaccinated individuals to travel. But the challenge there is, as we've seen, from the news in Europe, they keep on having rolling lockdowns. So, it's going to be complicated. Also, airlines and other travel providers are going to be changing their rules. Also, in terms of, free flight changes or, being able to cancel, kind of that no penalty and get a voucher, things like that. Those rules might go away because, there is kind of a boom in travel right now. More people are traveling. So they're not necessarily as put out as they were, months ago by the pandemic. And so some of those consumer-friendly policies could go away. And it's important to keep that in mind if you decide, you don't feel ultimately comfortable going on, that all-inclusive vacation in Mexico because maybe COVID cases are higher there. And then the important thing to keep in mind is the CDC in the past week has kind of said it's okay to travel. If you're vaccinated, you don't necessarily need to quarantine and do stuff like that when you get home from your trip. But they didn't recommend it either. The CDC director was very clear that she's not recommending nor advising against travel. They're not going to take a stance on whether it's okay or not really right now. So there's still a lot we don't know about the vaccines and how much protection they give folks. And I think as we learn more and more people are going to be traveling, but It's important to keep in all these rules and restrictions and guidance in mind.
Let me ask you about business travel, Jacob. I would imagine, during the pandemic, a lot of companies obviously shuttered their businesses, people working remotely. We all know this story. What about the restart of business travel? When you talk to experts, do you anticipate it being June, summer? When I think they targeted April, May that a lot more people will be vaccinated. But do you think the business travel is a huge amount of revenue for the airline industry and Amtrak, et cetera? Are you hearing that is anticipated to kind of increase this summer?
I think that business travel is still something of a question mark, and that's in part because this pandemic has, similar to, how there's still discussions about remote work going on and whether we really need to be in the office all the time, or if we can do more of our, jobs from home and don't necessarily need to worry about commutes and stuff like that. I think that businesses are going to be really much more closely evaluating the necessity of, paying for their employees to travel for conferences, for meetings, site visits, et cetera, because a lot of that can be done virtually. I mean,
Yep.
throughout the pandemic, I've attended a number of virtual conferences, and I'm sure listeners have as well. The conference industry didn't just, stop. They just kind of reassessed and moved online. And obviously, I think there's an extent to which you can't fully replace the in-person experience. And it is certainly nicer, meeting in person than, dealing with a Zoom call where people's connections are shaky and, going out and things like that. And you've got the distractions at home. But I think companies are going to be much more careful about their spending in that arena.
Yeah.
And I think that there is obviously an expectation that it will bounce back from the ultra low level we obviously saw during the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic. But I think there are still some questions about how much it's going to bounce back. And then you've also got, like a big deal right now is JetBlue is, in the past week, they made a couple of announcements related to transatlantic flights that they're planning to start some point in the near future between New York and Boston and London. And they're, introducing JetBlue pricing into first class. They're going to be first class options on those flights, but it's going to be priced more like a JetBlue flight than, your standard flight. So, they haven't announced the pricing yet, but it's expected to be many, many thousands of dollars less than it costs on your traditional, British Airways or Delta kind of experience. And so I think you'll also see those things happening. If companies are wanting to spend less money, you might also see some budget options entering that market. And driving the cost of travel down for businesses, but then there will be a lot of competition there as well.
It's going to be interesting. The return is not going to be seamless, and it's going to be incremental, I think. And
Totally.
we're going to have to adjust for that. And maybe it's 2022 when things get back to some level of normalcy. We just need to prepare ourselves mentally to that. Jacob, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. I'm so sorry that you muted yourself, or we had you on mute for a few minutes, but you were back. You did a great job. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the nice weather, and we look forward to having you back on the program again next week.
Yeah, talk soon. Bye-bye.
Welcome back. Now time to take a look at markets. Joining us on the line, he is the lead anchor for the TD Ameritrade Network. You can see him on Morning Trade Live and Markets on Close. I'm talking about Oliver Rennick. Oliver, great to talk to you as always. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, Jeff. Yep, no problem at all.
Awesome. And tell the audience you just walked off set and we're one of the first calls he made. So, Oliver, thanks. Thanks again. So when you look at trading through through Friday early afternoon here in the East Coast, what are some of the key themes that have developed all week long?
Well, the big thing that has been developing here and on Friday as well is seeing continued strength in the Treasury market after our first look at what is a pretty warm inflation print in PPI on Friday. And that, of course, being the market's primary concern right now is the potential for inflation in a recovering economy to slow the market down, even as the economy is picking up. So as we see over the past week, we've had quite a bit of strength in the bond market, and the question is whether or not that signals a end to higher yields in the short term, or if it's just kind of a much needed break. And that's difficult to figure out. And you can look at it technically and see that we were still generally trending higher for yield. You can look at it from kind of a relationship of the Fed with the market and argue that the market is understanding that Jay Powell is not going to hike rates, and so it's comfortable with bonds where they are. But we haven't really seen a lot of clear direction. We've kind of just gone sideways now for about 2.5 weeks in the Treasury market.
Oliver, I've been reading, you mentioned inflation. I've been reading about food prices, some of the core things that people consume begin to climb. Global food costs, not only here in the U.S., but global food costs are rising, and that's going to hit consumers in the pockets. I mean, that's, the cost of milk and eggs and, the staples that we all eat, bread, et cetera. I mean, there's inflationary pressure on that. So that has an impact on the market. That has an impact on, maybe not directly to treasuries, but it has and the bond market, but it does have an impact in what the retail investor will have, or the retail consumer will have in terms of being able to spend their money, because they're spending more on
Certainly.
goods like food or gasoline, because gasoline has seen a rise. They'll have less to spend in other places theoretically.
That is precisely the dynamic that is likely to take shape. And the idea here is that there is a heavy amount of savings that have built up, waiting to be deployed. That there is a strength in the kind of sentiment post-stimulus and within the employment situation, where we can get an economy that investors can feel comfortable with inflation, because there's just so much kind of positive force happening with it, right? Where, okay, if prices go up, but people are getting jobs again and they have confidence in the sustainability of that job now. It's not just money from the government. And obviously there's a very strong economic case to be made, even in the face of some inflation. We really would like to see some of that, right? Market is a little bit more kind of iffy in what it really wants. There is this idea that because over the past 2 weeks we've gotten firmness in the bond market and strength in tech companies, that we're completely out of the woods in terms of the kind of volatility from the month of February in tech. But I don't really think that's the case yet. I think that more what's happened is the 10-year yield going sideways has allowed the higher valuation type of tech companies to stabilize a little bit. Now, it's important to note that we're not getting a rally in companies like Tesla. We're not getting a rally in ARK funds. We're not getting a rally in some of the frothier stuff out there. Those stocks have more just stabilized. Instead, what we're getting is strength in big cap tech companies and the FANG stocks, which is great for the overall market because they are such a big part of it. But they can also kind of be thought of to some degree as a little bit of a defensive trade. And I mean, that's kind of the nature of this market, which is why it's so hard for this market to go down, because your biggest companies are so strong and so stable and so powerful. But what it also does suggest is that the investing community and just the market overall has lost a little bit of the leadership that was developing in some of the reopening stocks. And now we've kind of got ourselves in a little bit of a limbo state. So the past year, of course, was led by all these high-tech growth stocks. And then the year-to-date period was led by the reopening companies. And really since November, the reopening companies have been the leaders. But those have pulled back, and the very expensive growth stocks are still pulled back. And then the strength now in tech and utilities and staples, the big tech, is a little bit of a different type of wrinkle in the market that we've been watching. So you have to be very kind of specific now when we talk about these things, because we are making highs, and that's good. Big tech companies strong is good, but it also probably should put us on a little bit of kind of alert, just to be aware that some of these powerful narratives, whether it is about reopening or the powerful narratives about growth stocks, those are actually under a little bit of pressure still. So most likely probably is that we will revert back to those reopening themes, because that's just what seems to make the most compelling story in a reopening economy. All the data has been good. For the last 2 weeks, investors have just kind of taken a breath on that as well. So it's a little bit of an interesting pause in the market right now.
Last question, Oliver. A lot being talked about in terms of the Coinbase IPO. Wanted to get your sense for, I was going to say cybersecurity, not cybersecurity, for cryptocurrency. I have cybersecurity on the brain. We just did a show on that. For cryptocurrency and where that stands today. Bitcoin obviously seen a tremendous run up. Of course, that changes a lot overnight. But Coinbase is going to have one of the largest IPOs. Your thoughts on that and what's happening in crypto?
Yeah. Well, Bitcoin is very much on my top list of my radar as usual, because I think the most important thing about Bitcoin is that its price peaks and valleys fairly closely match the peaks and valleys of the valuation of the stock market, not necessarily the price of the stock market, but the valuation. If you overlay Bitcoin with the valuation of the Russell 3000 broad market index, you're going to see that the two generally peak and crash around the same time periods. And now that we have Bitcoin struggling to make this high, it's at a very interesting technical spot where its long-term trend is still very much intact, but its failure to make a new high over the past month suggests that there is some weakness creeping in, and you would generally expect when that chart pattern resolves for Bitcoin to rally higher, but it does introduce the possibility that if it breaks down, it's a very big deal because it would be doing something that is kind of opposite the trend we've seen. And that's a big thing to watch, because if Bitcoin does break down or break out, history tells us we should expect stock market valuations to break in the same direction. And my big question about the stock market is not so much about earnings and the economy. I think that is fairly straightforward at this point. We know the economy is going to boom, and we know that company earnings are going to climb. What we don't know is how much investors are going to be willing to pay for those earnings based on how expensive the stock market is. So I think Bitcoin will be the tell for a very important half of the stock market equation, and that is valuations.
Yeah, really interesting. Oliver, great analysis as always. Always a pleasure to check in. We're really fortunate to have you come right off the
Thanks,
set
Jeff.
and join us. Thanks for that analysis. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now time to take a look at what's going on Capitol Hill. Joining us on the line, they're better known as the Legal Eagles, but of course we also know them as David Levine and Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, and by the way, Kevin is outside, I think, amongst the trees and the birds, so you can hear him in the background. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Jeff, we're doing well. It's always good to be on the show. And we hope everybody is having a good week as spring comes into blossom and the birds start chirping.
Yeah, absolutely. Good timing on that, Kevin. David, what's top of mind this week?
Well, spring has sprung, and so have we. And children's songs come out to the fore. Here in Washington, D.C., we are eagerly anticipating the arrival of cicadas, which will overwhelm the outside with little flying creatures that will smash into everything. Although it would be better.
Which brood is it this year, David?
I forgot. I think it's like
which brood is this year?
I think it's brood 10. It's the really big one. It's the one that basically you're going to be like surrounded by it. And if you have a cat or something like that, or a dog, they're going to turn it into like a snack fest as they walk around outside, or just they'll play with them. So it's going to be a crazy year. But I don't.
So this week's episode all about cicadas?
It is all about cicadas, especially because we're going to get to hear the background from Kevin's phone about how beautiful it is outside. So this week we thought we'd talk about, guys, you always tell us that there's legislation coming, and for like years on end we were wrong because it always would be coming soon, and eventually it would actually come soon. In the past 12, 16 months, it's been like the parade of hits. Every couple months there's a new bill that has something relating to retirement or benefits in it. Now suddenly, where's the news? What's going on? So we thought we'd sort of prognosticate a little. We've talked before about Secure 2.0, the Retirement Security and Savings Act, and all these other bills. We're back in that phase when you see more and more proposals for legislation and other things coming out, whether it's things about ESG that are lurking out there at this point, whether it is and that could be regulatory, or whether it's automatic enrollment and mandates for 401ks, whether it's student loan features and how to tie them in, CITs and 403b, allowing Roth rollovers into plans. And I'd be remiss for my friend Kevin if I didn't mention things like setting up new processes to find missing participants. All that is true, and all that's in different versions of legislation out there. There's a lot of agreement in this Christmas tree legislation, but where is it? The simple answer is we all know we have a new president, President Biden, and we have narrow, as we've talked about, Democratic control right now. So where that leaves us for the moment is they've got a lot of priorities. And although it pains us to say this, benefits is not necessarily at the top of the list. There are some things, like COBRA benefits and that did get dealt with in some of the recovery legislation. But putting that aside, the bigger benefits packages, we're going to wait. We've already now also dealt with funding relief for pensions, which in some ways has been a blocker. So what's likely to happen is the Congress and the administration, at least for the next several months, it's probably going to be focused on things like infrastructure and other activities. And when there comes time for some type of bipartisan movement, you will see a swing back in. Benefits will probably pick up. But is it going to be top of list before then? You never know. But it seems like that there may be just some other focus that during this time. Does it mean people should give up? No, it's just about to happen at some point. And I heard the great outdoors clicking in, so I'm sure Kevin has some comments.
Go ahead, Kev.
Thanks, David. So I'm sure I have some comments. I mean, I think for a while here we were talking about, the Secure Act and how the cake was baked and the cake was in the oven and we were just waiting for it to finish. Right now, I agree with you, David. I think just about everything that's in the oven, everything that's in the queue to get baked is a partisan bill where, I think the narrow Democratic majority is trying to get some of its priorities through early because, shocking shock, every other year is an election year, and that's not great time for partisan legislation. What we are seeing, though, on the benefits front is that, they're beginning to mix the next cake. So we're starting to see provisions. We're starting to see different proposals, and we're starting to see kind of standalone, tiny little pieces that could end up in the mix for when this partisan moment ends and there's a return to at least some bipartisanship. And at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a more robust benefits bill start moving again.
So if I could jump in, guys, real quick, just one question before we kind of end the segment for each of you. And I guess, if you're going into those committee meetings, typically they're about investment returns, but there's always things to talk about: plan administration, process, procedure, regulatory. What types of conversations are sponsors having in those meetings? Are they thinking about some of these regulatory or legislative things, or you just kind of put them aside, you make them aware and say, hey, these things could happen and you need to be prepared, because if they do, there'll be an amendment that's required to your document, or there'll be opportunities to enhance your program?
Well, I think right now in these meetings, Jeff, if the meeting is a long meeting, and some of these meetings go very long, sometimes people want to go in depth. But I think in a lot of them, people are noting it and moving on. Mm-hmm. They're still dealing with implementation issues from prior legislation, like the qualified birth or adoption provisions is something that's coming up in meetings. And similarly, we're focused on other things that Kevin and I have talked about before. Yes, there's missing participants, but there's more. There is. Well, no, it's actually true. It does come up. But there's other things that come up in terms of, okay, what is evolving between the Department of Labor's going into effect of its new prohibited transaction involving fiduciaries and potential conflicts, and how service providers are adapting their services. We're already starting to see service providers say, hey, this is how we're going to approach rollovers between going back to Reg BI and now even the DOL, how we're going to approach rollovers. And there's different schools of thought out there, and there's different business models, and people are looking at that. And even there's also data and security, knowing the DOL is going to come out with its guidance. The GAO put out its report that basically recapped a lot of what's going on that I think many people have been thinking about. But there's that natural push-pull about how people want their data and services provided. There's very few one definitive right answers, but that's a lot of the debates you still see going on. And I think you will continue to see it as we go forward. So I think that's what people are seeing right at this moment. And of course, if you have defined benefit plans, you're talking funding relief. All right, so I'll hand it back to the great outdoors.
Go ahead, Kev.
I think, David, you made some great points there. I mean, my only other point would be that, while Secure seems like it was forever ago for us swamp dwellers, there's a whole lot of, implementation that remains to be done. Discussions about annuities are beginning to happen that really weren't happening before. But I think you hit on everything there, David.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate you stopping by for 10 plus minutes each and every week. Really great content, great substance, and a place where people can really find out the latest of what's going on. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our newsletter, The Morning Pulse, and of course, our website. We're back again tomorrow for BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.